How many prospects make their UFC debut each year? The relentless scouts recruit young and energized fighters by the dozens or even hundreds, but only 20% of them get a chance to establish themselves, and only 1 in 1,000 succeed. Conor McGregor was one of such unicums at this time, but in 2020 at the Abu Dhabi tournament in the UFC debuted a fighter who even eclipsed the notorious Irishman in the speed of his rise. The new star of the best world promotion, the most prominent fighter of the roster, and a real smash machine, Khamzat Chimaev. Currently, Borz is one of the few main stars of the promotion, and soon he will finally return to the octagon in the middleweight division, where he will face Kamaru Usman. In anticipation of this fight, we want to dive into Khamzat's biography and show you what he went through on his way to glory. Make yourself comfortable and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here we go. You all know that for the last few years, Chimaev lived in Sweden and went to fights with a flag of his country, but almost all the childhood of the future fighter was spent in Chechnya, which at the time could not boast of peace and prosperity.
In my village, some small village, was tough time when I was young. I remember that stuff. It was after the war. I come to this world when it's World War.
He had a difficult childhood, but that did not break him, only hardened his already tough Chechen character. Like many children of the region, Chimaev Jr. started wrestling from this time when he was a baby, and always encouraged by his older brother, whom Khamzat himself considered better than his father.
Like my father always be close to me, and we're still close, like maybe, if that one was my big brother, maybe I was in some jail somewhere.
Thanks to his brother, Chimaev ended up in Europe. The fact is that in 2010, his brother needed an operation that could not be done in Chechnya, so he later traveled with his wife and children to Sweden, where he received the necessary help. Later, he decided not to return to his homeland and invited all his family members to move in with him, which happened in 2013. This event became one of the most important in the life of Borz. By the way, Chimaev's nickname translates from his native language as wolf, and the fighter has always regarded this animal as a symbol, denying the nickname Chechen Viking, which was given to him much later. With a good brace of wrestling, which he had developed in the halls of Chechnya, Khamzat continued to train in the halls of the new place and was so successful that he soon became a 6-time champion of Sweden. And in 2018, he was able to win first place in 2 weight categories at once. Despite his achievement in sports, the Chimaev family's quality of life still left much to be desired.
Like in normal fabric, like I was going home, like not so nice apartment. We live like big family, mom and my brother, sister. We live in some apartment, and every morning before the work, I go out and running. Like see the big house, nice apartments. And
besides working at the freezer factory, Khamzat worked part-time as a security guard at a nightclub and even as a probation officer for people with criminal records. As you might understand, none of this brought the Chechen much money, but he soon realized how he could change his life. Khamzat had been watching mixed martial arts, and he was interested in the main stars of the league, such as Khabib and Conor. Realizing how much money fight stars can get, Khamzat burned with the idea of becoming like these tough guys and decided to find a use for his wrestling background. He made his amateur mixed martial arts debut in 2017, and his haven was Sweden's premier MMA gym, All Stars, where Alexander Gustafsson, Ilir Latifi, and Jimmy Manua were already training at the time. Funny enough, the first time Borz visited the gym was when he won a trip to Stockholm at another freestyle wrestling tournament. Arriving in Stockholm, Khamzat first of all went to the best MMA fighters of the country and stayed there. At the amateur level, the guy won 3 early victories, and of all these performances, we have only the footage of the first fight, which we will talk about in more detail. The luckiest man on earth, and there is no other way to call someone who met the Chechen machine in the cage for the first time, was the Swede Khaled Lalam, with 1 win in the amateurs. Poor Khaled was thrown to the ground in the first 5 seconds of the confrontation. Khamzat did not focus on striking from side control or other positions. He clearly wanted to make some kind of hold on an opponent, but he defended himself and got back on his feet, after which, however, he again flew to the ground. The second segment started with footwork, where Chimaev distinguished himself again, sending Khaled to the ground with a straight right. Once again, the action went back to the stand-up, where the Swede tried to surprise and went for a takedown himself, but was quickly caught on the arm triangle choke. In the crazy whirlwind of transitions, Borz found the perfect position and executed a choke. Already in 2018, Khamzat moved up to the pros. This is where his epic story begins. Chimaev's first opponent in his professional career was Norwegian fighter Gard Ove Sagen with a record of 1-1. Unfortunately, a full recording of the fight has not been saved, but it is known that it ended in the second round when the Chechen beat his opponent in a clinch, sent him down by knockdown, and later hammered him on the ground. He made his debut in May, and the next performance of the Chechen Viking, as he was nicknamed in Europe, took place at the end of the summer at a Swedish MMA tournament. This time, Khamzat's opponent was again a fighter from Norway, Ola Magnor, with an incredible, one might say even outstanding, record of 1-4. Chimaev stepped in the center of the stage in a left-handed stand-up, only to land a side kick to the knee and a rush in for the takedown. After completing a spectacular takedown, the Swedish wrestling champion turned to furious attacks from the top. Ola did not let himself be beaten so easily and constantly shifted, trying to take a more favorable position. But the physical strength and incredible wrestling skills of Borz gave Magnor no chance to save himself. Most of the time, Chimaev was behind his back and throwing punches, but at one point, his opponent did manage to get up, but he quickly returned to his original position and was punished with an armbar behind his back. After pulling off one incredible trick, Khamzat threw a choke on the guy from behind, corrected the mouth guard right during the hold, and made Magnor pass out from lack of air. Ultra domination. Just 2 fights at European tournaments were enough for the gifted Chechen to be noticed by his friends from the East, more precisely by the heads of the famous Brave promotion. The organization was founded in 2018 by a member of the Bahrain family, and in the short time of its existence, managed to let many talented guys from nearby countries pass through. Chimaev was invited to one of the fall tournaments, where he was matched up against Austrian submission master Marco Kisik with a 4-0 record. The welterweight division was chosen. Knowing what his opponent could do on the ground, Chimaev wasn't going to wrestle, but decided to put up a hell of a fight on his hands and feet. Not estimating his strength, Khamzat rushed in at close range with swinging punches, flying knees, and Marco obligingly fell on his back, expecting to be able to close the guard. But this move didn't work. Eventually, the guys got into a comfortable position for Chimaev, and the Borz was in a side control, but his opponent's threats from below forced him up. Almost immediately afterwards, Khamzat really dropped Marco with an accentuated punch. Taking advantage of the momentum, he immediately went full mount and harshly hammered his opponent. Not wasting his time, Khamzat asked for new challenges as often as possible, and the promotion gave him a fight as early as next month. At Brave 20, Borz, this time at middleweight, was scheduled to share the cage with American prospect Sidney Wheeler with a 5-3 record and losses to future UFC fighters Gerald Meerschaert and Brendan Allen. The first 4 seconds may have been the best of Sidney's life, as he flew at Chimaev with punches and even delivered one to Khamzat, but after that, the good moments ended for him. Khamzat easily completed the takedown and climbed on top of the American. After twisting his left arm, the Chechen began throwing terrifying punches with Spartan fury, and the referee decided to stop the fight. Let's be honest, all the people Khamzat had fought up to that point were not the strongest or most experienced guys, so easy victories over them really didn't say much about Chimaev's real level, but the next opponent could show what the Viking was really capable of. In the middle of the spring of 2019, Borz met the incredibly dangerous Russian fighter Ikram Aliskerov, known in the sports community for his insane achievements in the field of combat sambo. In addition, Ikram was a student of one of the best coaches of the world, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. As it usually happens, the two base wrestlers started with a hand stand-up exchange, and only after that, Khamzat tried to make a one-leg pass but faced a worthy counter. The Chechen went on the attack again and dropped Ikram with a jab, but Chimaev went back to his plan A. But no matter how hard he tried, Aliskerov countered all the takedowns and didn't stay on the ground even for a second. Realizing that this was not the way to succeed, the future UFC star broke the distance and started throwing his quick punches at his opponent, and soon he dodged a jab and threw a terrible right uppercut. The punch was enough to send Ikram flying into a dead knockout. So far, this defeat remains the only one in Aliskerov's career, and he dreams of a rematch already under the UFC banner. Less than a year later, after his professional debut, Khamzat went on a streak of 5 wins in a row, and each of them was more beautiful than the previous ones. People started talking about the guy as a future UFC fighter, and soon he will really be there. But before that, Chimaev had to have one more fight at the Brave tournaments. Mzwan Dile Holongwa, a compatriot of Dricus du Plessis on a streak of 3 wins by knockout, agreed to become the opponent of the Smash Machine. Borz quickly showed the level of South African wrestling, executing a brutal takedown in the opening seconds. Holongwa's huge muscles did not help him to drive the beast away from him, and he remained helplessly on the ground, simply preventing his opponent from going to mount, while Khamzat was throwing light punches and pressing from the top. The Chechen squeezed Holongwa on the ground for a whole first round, and after the break, he picked him up in his arms, carried him to his corner, and threw him to the ground. He showed his undivided dominance with his takedown, and the next action only confirmed it. Seeing the opportunity, Khamzat threw a signature arm triangle choke on his opponent. The choke was so tight that his opponent didn't even have time to tap and passed out. Despite the humble number of fights in his career, Khamzat was noticed by UFC scouts, and his next performance was in the world's best promotion, more precisely on Yas Island in the UAE. The Welsh fighter John Phillips was a 2-3 record in his last round of fights, and a funny nickname, White Mike Tyson, became his test in the debut. The guy had their fight in the middleweight division. John managed to throw out 2 punches before ending up on the ground. As soon as that happened, in his best tradition, Khamzat dragged the guy close to his corner and started striking terribly. Every attempt to get up ended with a dozen Chechen punches to the face and a submission attempt. The difference in the level of grappling between the guys was enormous, and the opponent could not counter anything against Khamzat. White Mike Tyson survived for 5 minutes and by some miracle heard the gong, and when the second segment started, everything repeated itself. Borz quickly flew to his feet and proceeded to hammer him. A brilliant performance highlighted by a $50,000 bonus. Obviously, Chimaev's performance generated genuine interest from fans and management, but that wasn't enough for him. Khamzat wanted to become a fighter who would get all the media attention, and he found a way to do it. And at the same time, set a historic record for the men's division. The meeting with John Phillips took place on July 16th, and on July 25th, the Chechen was allowed to fight again. This venture on his part started to seem even crazier when he realized that the fight would take place in the welterweight division, not the middleweight division. Khamzat's opponent was debutant Rhys McKee, but even if Kamaru Usman himself had been there, they would only still be discussing the crazy newcomer who doesn't need a pause between performances. The difference in strength between him and his opponent is unimaginable, and it became clear when Borz easily lifted and carried his opponent from one end of the cage to the other, and then locked a clinch and performed a takedown. Rhys didn't manage to land a single punch, but Chimaev wasn't so humble and was throwing his best hammer fist at his opponent, mostly from the right. After a couple of minutes of total destruction, the debutant's face began to turn into a bloody mess, but the Chechen kept slashing with his elbows and fists. In total, the terrible beating lasted for 3 minutes, and when the kid stopped moving at all, the referee finally stopped the fight. Another $50,000 for the performance of the evening. Already at that time, Khamzat had become a national hero. People were discussing the incredible victories of a guy they didn't even know yesterday with delight. Now the whole MMA world was interested in how Chimaev would perform next time, and Borz did not delay his return and entered the tournament in a mid-September again in the middleweight division. His third opponent in the UFC was extremely experienced grappler Gerald Meerschaert. While Meerschaert retreated backwards, his eyes lit up more and more with the words "help," and Chimaev pushed on, and thus only further shattered his opponent's confidence in his abilities. Pressing Gerald against the cage with a mid-kick, the Chechen landed a straight right, and his opponent was knocked out. One precise punch sent the experienced fighter into a deep knockout, and his lifeless body rolled off the cage. Khamzat wins in just 17 seconds. What a monster! One missed punch in 3 fights in the UFC, that's exactly the kind of stats that Khamzat Chimaev had. The fans were already going crazy, imagining how Khamzat would deal with the champions of Usman and the other heads of the company, realizing that they should just bet on the guy and promote him as soon as possible, but everything was not so simple. The ranked guys were unwilling to agree to face Chimaev for objective reasons. A no-name who had just made it to the UFC, it was too dangerous to take a fight against him. Then, the company's management changed the rhetoric and found a man who hasn't or wasn't left with a choice. Leon Edwards. After the victory over Rafael dos Anjos, Rocky decided to take a break and wait for the title fight. Especially the third line of the rating allowed him to do it, but the fighter decided to be given to Khamzat. Of course, Leon refused, but the UFC gave him an ultimatum, kicking him out of the rankings, and soon we saw that a fight between Edwards and Chimaev was in the works. These guys knew how to persuade. Unfortunately, it was not possible to organize the meeting on the scheduled date, and due to the British man's illness, it was postponed. But then, Khamzat himself had an illness. The damn coronavirus messed up everyone's cards, and the fight was again postponed, and later cancelled because of the serious consequences of Chimaev's illness. As we would soon discover later, the virus had a serious impact on the Chechen's lungs, and he was unable to train properly, and once even posted a post in which he announced that he was ending his career due to health problems. This news caused a serious stir, but was later refuted by Dana White himself, who talked to the guy and convinced him to undergo a course of treatment with an excellent specialist and then talk about his career. After that, Khamzat really went through a course of treatment and began to feel much better, and soon got a fight for the long-awaited comeback. After the tournament on October 30th in his favorite UAE, he had to face the first-ranked fighter in his career, the tough Chinese knockout artist Li Jingliang. Everyone was waiting for Khamzat, and he did not disappoint. Khamzat comes back just as he had been in his previous performances, as usual, rushed straight to his opponent's legs. Li managed to defend against a straight pass, but as soon as the Borz was behind the Chinese backs, he was lifted into the air and thrown to the ground with force. As soon as Chimaev caught his opponent, it was clear that he could not escape the steel grip. The Chechen dominated in the grappling game, and he smashed the poor guy with both hands, trying to grab his neck in the process. At first, Li defended himself from the choke, but then he missed the momentum and his neck was restrained by stone hands. The Chinese was able to survive the first choke attempt, but the second time, Chimaev was unstoppable and forced his opponent to pass out. A triumphant comeback once again highlighted by a bonus. The win over the tough veteran finally bumped the UFC's main hope up to the rankings, to be exact, to number 11. Such a boost made Khamzat an even more recognizable and popular fighter, but other ranked fighters still didn't want to associate with him, so it took the promotion a long time to pick Chimaev's next opponent. During this break, Borz didn't sit idle and managed to have a grappling bout with middleweight Jack Hermanson, who is known for his wrestling skills. The promotion's welterweight star looked simply gigantic against middleweight Jack and easily dominated him for the entire given time. Finally, a few months after the Khamzat vs. Li fight, the big news arrived. Chimaev's next fight would be against number 2 ranked and former belt challenger Gilbert Burns. The physically strong and experienced jiu-jitsu black belt with a knockout power looked like one of the toughest opponents in the entire weight class. Gilbert himself, of course, said he just didn't believe in Khamzat type and would easily deal with him. Spoiler, the fight was not easy for anyone. Borz went for the takedown, hoping to quickly take a favorable position, but the experienced grappler was stubborn and wasn't going to fall on his back so easily. When the Chechen did manage to put Gilbert on his back, he applied a butterfly guard work, and the Swedish wrestling champion didn't risk exchanging with such a titan on the ground. In the stand-up, Chimaev had the advantage in arm span, and he used it perfectly, throwing long punches at Gilbert, but the guy didn't stay away and exploded with a couple of punches, occasionally reaching the target. Towards the end of the segment, things were relatively calm, but then Khamzat dropped Burns with a right punch and went for the takedown. A hail of powerful hammer fists rained down on the jiu-jitsu master, but he survived and was able to get back to his feet. The second round began with stand-up games, and Chimaev looked pretty good. He moved around a lot, changed positions, and threw a lot of jabs, knowing that his opponent had a problem with them, but the Chechen's defense left much to be desired. Close to the middle of the round, Burns sent his opponent into a flash knockdown, and then landed a terrible series of power punches. After that, the Brazilian repeatedly delivered his explosive punches, and 10 seconds before the end, he dropped Khamzat again, but he rushed into the wrestling and didn't give a chance to finish him. In just 5 minutes of the fight, Khamzat received more punches than in his entire career before. The guy came out incredibly tired for the final round, but Burns seemed to be extremely tired. Chimaev felt his opponent's blood and started throwing a lot more punches. At one point, it even smelled like the end of the fight, but then the Brazilian rekindled his fire and went on the attack with renewed vigor. A few right punches definitely shook the exhausted Chechen, but he didn't show it and kept pushing on, accepting the slaughter. The last seconds of the segment ended with a jumping knee from Chimaev and the ensuing clinch. The guys were awarded the Fight of the Evening bonus for their great show, and Khamzat won the fight by unanimous decision. Gilbert became the first opponent who was able to go the full distance with Khamzat and also revealed the gaps in the guy's defense. But the main goal of the UFC was completed. Chimaev got into the top 5 of his weight class. The fight for the belt was very close, but Chimaev's old buddy, Leon Edwards, was a contender for the title. So, Borz had to have one more fight before his run. The promotion did a pretty smart thing and decided to feed another popular fighter, Nate Diaz, to the star. Talks about their fight began at the moment, and when confidential photos were accidentally leaked to social media, on which the promotion's interesting matchups were shown, one of them turned out to be a meeting between Khamzat and Nate. Soon it became known that the bout of welterweights is not only in the works, but will headline one of the September tournaments, but everything did not turn out quite as we planned. First, the press conference that many expected was cancelled. Dana White said that Khamzat and Nate's teams had crossed paths in one of the rooms, with several dozen people on each side, and the UFC wasn't ready to bring the fighters together in the same room, risking another mass fight. Almost immediately afterward, news flew in that the Chechen was seen eating lunch at a restaurant, causing him to fail making the required weight. As confirmation of Chimaev's deviation from the regime was the weigh-in ceremony, at which he failed to make the weigh by more than 5 pounds. Nate immediately got involved and stated that he would not fight against such a cheater, so the UFC had to solve the problems by rearranging the pairs. Khamzat was placed at interim weight against Kevin Holland, with whom he had another conflict, and Diaz had to share the octagon with Tony Ferguson in the main event of the evening. So, what happened in Khamzat's fight with the Kung Fu master? Kevin has never been known for his defense against takedowns, and a fight against such a wrestling master initially looked like suicide for him. From the first seconds, Khamzat rushed into the clinch and looked for a way to get out of the takedown. Holland tried to resist, but he was still laid on his shoulder blades. The wildest pressing allowed the Borz to quickly find a weak spot in the opponent's defense, and he, with almost no punches, began to apply his favorite arm triangle choke. A couple of initial attempts to close the hold failed, but Chimaev was persistent and at some point simply left his opponent no way out. Holland tapped just 2 minutes from the start. Khamzat won the fight, but his reputation was damaged by a failed weigh-in. Later, White himself said that he knew about the guy's problems with his weight and talked to the doctor who was called in because of the fighter's cramps. It turned out that the head of the promotion knew about all the difficulties and the fight with Holland was planned. Well, it doesn't change the situation, but clarifies some points. Only one question remained: what should the Chechen do now? Dana insisted that Khamzat won't fight in the welterweight division anymore, while Borz himself disappeared from the media space and didn't comment on the situation. At first, it seemed that the guy needed some rest, and then we would get all the answers. But he didn't show up even after 2 months, and even half a year. Journalists were already asking Dana White where Khamzat went, to which Dana replied, "The guy has personal problems. He doesn't fight, not because we don't give him fights." For a long time, we didn't know what those problems were until one curious fact recently came to light. Khamzat will now compete under the UAE flag. The fighter, who has lived on the territory of Sweden for many years, now refuses to call himself its citizen and will not go out with the European flag. It is not difficult to find out why Khamzat is so categorical about his second homeland. For quite a long time, the country has been witnessing harassment of Muslim citizens, accompanied by strikes and public acts of burning the Quran. Chimaev has repeatedly said that he does not support all these things, and it now seems that his patience has come to an end. The fighter now represents the Chechen club Akhmat, where he has trained before, and the flag has been changed to the UAE, while the citizenship, as many media sources say, Khamzat has most likely not changed, as it is incredibly difficult. Shortly before the news about Chimaev's new flag, we learned that his next fight will take place at middleweight, and he'll be forced to face a huge and incredibly strong Kamaru Usman. If Khamzat gets his hand raised at the Abu Dhabi event on October 21st, he's 99% likely to become the next middleweight title challenger, and given the current situation, he has a great chance of taking the belt. An incredible fighter, isn't he? Together, we dived into the biography of one of the brightest and most attractive fighters in recent years, and we must say that it's very interesting. Khamzat Chimaev is a man with an unusual destiny who made himself a star in just a few fights, which only a few people managed to do. Many people call him a mixture of Khabib and Conor, but I believe that Borz is an incredibly original character. the kind we have never seen before. It's hard to predict how his fate will turn out, but if he keeps working hard and keeps crushing his opponents with his bulletproof confidence, he has a great future ahead of him, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. How about you? Write down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.